Warning. The following podcast features views and opinions that are likely to trigger the extreme fanboys and fangirls who disagree with them. Listener discretion is advised.
Live from Business HQ, and when I say live, you know I'm telling the truth because, as a lot of you pointed out last week when producer Bill was here, I left in an error. We thought we heard a siren, and he asked to stop. I was like, no, we're good. And I forgot to edit it out because we are live, we are uncensored, no lies here. You may have noticed that he's already chimed in. Probably the most dangerous person to give a live mic to today. I'm joined by the other half of the Nerd Goat podcast, Mr. Ron Swallow.
Hi, how's it going, man?
Dude, I'm happy to do this because the first time that we really started to talk and to get to know each other, I was like, man, this guy knows a lot about film. You have some opinions that maybe are outside the beaten path, but you actually are very good at articulating the emotionality of how you feel about something. And I feel like today's movie is definitely gonna
be fun, man. I'm excited.
And
it's also, by the way,
yeah,
a thing that I've realized that I've liked and that I let other people influence my brain for a long time. Because whenever I go back and rewatch this specific thing we're going to talk about, I always have a pretty good time. But like for a long time, I was like, I don't like it.
Yeah, this was one of those movies that it was in the infancy before the internet was the internet. Came this movie, and of course, we were talking about George Lucas's 1999, the 20th anniversary. Can you believe it?
20th anniversary.
Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Every saga has a beginning. And we actually just had the beginning of our own saga.
That's right.
This last Sunday at LA Comic-Con, we did our live show Reboot It, where we figured out, I'd say pretty impeccably, how to reboot Batman for Warner Brothers properly.
Yeah, we crushed it, of course, as always. That's how we do everything.
It was a lot of fun. We loved meeting a lot of you and seeing you out there. But don't panic. If you're not in LA, if you were in LA and couldn't make it, that doesn't mean that it was one and done. It's over. No, this is just the beginning of the saga. That episode will be available in just a couple weeks. Be sure to follow the Nerd Goat podcast at Nerd Goat Podcast and myself at Billy A. Patterson for more details. Speaking of beginning of sagas, I also want to note that this is coming out on the 1 year anniversary of me doing this show. And
that's awesome.
And as I've said many a times, it was doing the Nerd Goat podcast that made me realize, you know what? We don't always have to just yell and fight, and there's no winners, losers. We can just talk about things.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Don't have to have a contest all the time.
Right. Sometimes you're just talking. So thank you to you and Ed and producer Bill for getting this all going, and thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate it.
It's a great podcast.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And now, without further ado, let's get into this bad boy. We're talking about Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Let's talk a little bit about how this came to be. This is tough to put into context because the creator, George Lucas, has changed his story so many times.
Yes.
In so many different interviews. There's a great set of books, The Making of Star Wars, The Making of Empire Strikes Back, The Making of Return of the Jedi. They're so dense and so thorough that go through just the start of making this trilogy to the end, the original trilogy. And it changed from, I had 9 movies, and then I, wanted to take the middle, and then it was like, no, there's 6, and then no, there's 3, and then no, there's 9 again, and no, there's only 6.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people don't realize, because it's easy and sometimes kind of fun to poke fun at George Lucas, but what a lot of people don't realize is just the absolute sacrifice that making Star Wars took on the toll of George Lucas. It kind of ruined his life a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, even the original trilogy, the guy was like under immense pressure to deliver a product that's supposed to be amazing, and it looked like he was not going to deliver at all.
Multiple times.
Yeah.
By the way, this guy, both A New Hope and Return of the Jedi landed George Lucas in the hospital.
Yeah.
Like when I say these movies damn near killed him.
He was having panic attacks,
right?
And
he thought he was having
anxiety.
a heart attack.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane what this did to him. But so it's understandable that he would say, you know what, after this last one, after Return of the Jedi is out the door, kind of just I don't want to do these anymore. And we took it at face value.
Yeah.
And he deserved a break because he'd given his life to Star Wars. Then, Star Wars kind of, and I don't remember this time because, I'm a little bit on the younger side. And by younger, I mean like I'm 33.
Yeah.
So I kind of grew up with Star Wars always being somewhere in the zeitgeist. Even if I wasn't aware of it, it was on the peripheral. But there was a dark time for Star Wars where, Return of the Jedi came out, and then it kind of went radio silence a little bit until the Timothy Zahn novels came out, Heir to the Empire, the whole Thrawn stuff.
I've read all of them.
Yeah.
I've read every single Star Wars book.
Every single
except for a few of the new ones.
How pissed are you that
I'm very mad. Super mad. I really loved those books.
That is a different show.
As you can tell by me reading every single one of them.
And that's a lot. There's hundreds.
Hundreds, yes. I'm a reader, though.
Yeah, definitely. Because that's
my first love.
A lot of your favorite characters end up being from novels. I remember that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole Thrawn stuff kind of reinvigorated Star Wars. And this was about the time that George Lucas was like, you know what? Technology has come a long way. Maybe it's time to go back and do the prequels, because that's what he always wanted to do. And around the time of doing Young Indiana Jones and some of the other stuff that ILM was doing and putting out the Star Wars special edition, he was like, I think we're at a point where I can do this the way I want to do it with special effects and everything.
I think that totally makes sense, because he had to be frustrated that he couldn't do what his imagination wanted him to do.
I mean, it's very obvious even within the original trilogy, because you go back and you look at Return of the Jedi, and there are so many mulligans in Return of the Jedi that you're like, clearly you wanted to do the cantina over again with Jabba's palace.
Yes.
Like, it's very clear that like you just wanted one more shot at getting it the way that you wanted to get it. So I think George Lucas has always, and even with that Bob Iger autobiography that just came out, and he was talking about George's unhappiness with Episode 7, George, basically said like, where was the technical breakthrough? Where was the achievement and effects? And I think George has always been like, Star Wars is definitely like a tale of morality, but it's also in the industry used to push it forward a little bit. And I could see his point. That's also another podcast about Force Awakens, but I see his point. Long story short, he finally felt like he could tell a lot of things that he couldn't do. The Coruscant is a big part of this movie.
Yep.
The Imperial City was in those original story pitches for Return of the Jedi, but it just wasn't possible back then.
Yeah, of course not.
And again, another thing that he's like, that Death Star didn't look exactly how I wanted to. Let's make it bigger. Let's just do another Death Star. Yeah. So by the time that Episode 1 comes out, we're now 16 years past the end of Return of the Jedi. This thing, Star Wars especially really came up in 1997 again with the special editions. The next year announcing that like this is coming. Star Wars was just all on our minds. Even Ron Howard said in an interview he did a couple years back that Zemeckis, Spielberg, and himself were offered the role to direct Phantom Menace.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then finally, I think all of them kind of came to this consensus like, George, like, this is your story. You now have the tools to do it. You should just do this.
Interesting. So I wonder what it would have been like.
Well, Spielberg, it's rumored and heavily implied that he was in line to do Return of the Jedi, but because, George had that famous falling out with the Directors Guild, it just didn't work out that way. This movie, to say it was a movie is almost to minimize what it was in the spring of 99. I mean,
I stood in line but to get tickets
same.
At midnight. Like, I stood in line for, I want to say 6 hours, and we were at the front.
So I remember my mom...
it might have been overnight.
For tickets?
Yeah, because we got... Yeah, it was overnight because we got like chairs and a tent.
So I had the cool mom, and she pulled me out of school, and we got in line at about, I want to say 4 a.m. And tickets where I lived went on sale at noon. So we sat out there for 8 hours. You're right. That was before Fandango or reserved seats. You had to go wait for the tickets and then come back and wait again
And for the movie.
For the actual movie.
Yeah.
But there was an employment consultant that did a survey, and they said that 2.2 million full-time employees missed work that day, which resulted in $293 million loss of productivity across the board. Like, this thing kind of like stopped our economy.
Yeah.
But even now, this is part that I didn't realize, because when this came out, I was in 7th grade.
Okay.
And then when I'm in 7th grade,
I was a grown man.
when I'm in 7th grade, I don't really register critics and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it was divided with critics out the get-go.
Yes.
It currently has a 53% on Rotten Tomatoes.
There was a bunch of hate for Jar Jar. So much hate that I think it ruined a lot of people's opinion of the whole movie.
Absolutely, but also you look at the cinema score, and it was A-. And the cinema scores, where they're getting people walking right out of this movie. And I think that's where I kind of want to start with this.
Okay.
Because I think walking out of Phantom Menace, I'd be hard-pressed to find a lot of people that walked out disappointed. It wasn't until later, I'll even give the credit. It wasn't until, like, for some people, maybe a day later, that it was like, wait a second, did I like that?
Yes.
But you're right. This was pre-internet. Not that internet didn't exist and wasn't a thing, but it wasn't what it is today. There wasn't Twitter. There wasn't, like, the immediate social media feedback of it. I remember
slowly burn into hatred.
I didn't even know how much people didn't dislike this until like years later.
Same with me.
You were in a unique position because you worked at a movie theater when this came out.
That is correct.
Tell me about that period of time working on the other side, knowing that this movie's coming.
Well, I did not. Well, it was interesting. I did not work the opening, but I did get to work while it was just in the theater. And the best part about that was when I would take breaks, I would just go sit at the back with a giant bag of popcorn that I got for free, a huge soda, and just watch, for 15 minutes, whenever it was on. So I would literally watch it in parts. And then sometimes the guy who ran the projector would let us stay late, and we'd watch it, just like me and these bunch of nerds who worked at a movie theater.
So how many times, if you had to guesstimate?
20 times.
Wow.
While I was in the theater, I would bet.
That's a lot for this movie.
I mean, I was working there for, months and months and months, and it
Right.
stayed in back in the day, they stayed in theaters for a really long time.
Yeah, I remember Phantom Menace having really long legs that summer, which is crazy because when you go back and look at 1999 as a whole, like
Matrix, right?
Matrix, Austin Powers 2,
Yep.
down the pipe would be Fight Club, which didn't do well in theaters.
Oh, that's true. It didn't.
But still, like, it was just like a murderer's row of movies all coming out around the same time. So the fact that Phantom Menace was able to have that staying power was more a testament to people. That's why I said, like, I don't think people realized right away if they didn't like it, because people kept going back.
Yeah, and you know why I think that is? I can relate it to comedy. If you go see a stand-up comic, or like a normal show, not like an LA show where you're seeing 12 comics, but like if you go see a regular show where you see a 15-minute guy, a 30-minute guy, and a 45-minute headliner, and the headliner's last 7 minutes is just crushing, and then you leave feeling like you've had a great show.
Sure.
You might not have had a great show. The middle guy could have been just okay. The opener could have sucked. But because the last 7 minutes, you were just like laughing your ass off, you had a good time when you left. You left with a smile on your face. And the ending of Phantom Menace is a pretty solid ending.
I would agree with that 100%. But before we can talk about that pretty solid ending, let's just address the 150-pound gunkin in the room,
Okay.
which is Jar Binks.
Yeah.
Because the first thing you say, episode 1, 9 times out of 10, people go like,
Jar Binks, yes.
And I'm not even saying that Jar Jar is funny. I get it. I totally get it. But here's the thing with Jar Jar that I kind of feel like is I feel like he's not also given credit for what he does do in this movie.
Okay.
And I'm not saying even just the movie. Like, let's take a step back from the movie and just look at, like, you talk about, George Lucas is talking about pushing the craft forward. Like, when we think of motion capture performances, the first thing that probably pops into your mind is Andy Serkis and Gollum.
Yeah.
And I think that was the first time it was done like borderline perfectly. But people forget that George and ILM in episode 1 and Ahmed Best as Jar Jar, they really kind of set the standard for like, we're going to do this. We're going to not just have like a little CGI creature that's on screen for a couple minutes. We are going to have a fully functional character that interacts with our main cast.
Yeah.
And it is going to be all motion capture. And for that, like, it's kind of hard to dismiss Jar Jar out of hand purely for the technical craft of it.
Well, you know, and I was just rewatching it, like 30 minutes ago.
Sure. Yeah.
And he looks pretty good considering it's 20 years old.
Right. I mean,
there's pretty solid.
There's definitely shots that are not going to hold
For
up,
sure.
but that's any movie
from 1999. Even some stuff in the Matrix, you're like,
yeah. No, I totally hear you. Like, look, the stuff, and that's not to say too, like, here's where I land with Star Wars as a whole. And I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I would go so far as to say this is what George Lucas thinks of Star Wars as a whole. It is a movie and a franchise for everyone, but it is aimed specifically as morality tales for coming of age kids.
yeah.
And do I think that Jar Jar getting a face full of fart at a pod race from a weird space goat is like a morality tale or even what kids think is funny? Probably not. And I think George Lucas would probably be the first to say, like, yeah, maybe we went too far a couple times. Yeah. But I think Jar Jar, I remember Jar Jar being like a hit with the younger crowd.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that's okay. There's enough in this movie that it's okay to have a small part of it be something that's not for you.
Yeah. Well, and okay, so as far as what I remember having gone and seen it and sitting in the back while kids laughed at Jar Jar did every single time.
Yeah, without fail. I'm pretty sure that Jar Jar was a favorite for a lot of kids. And I've heard the stories. There's a ton of Jar Jar toys like left on the shelves. I'm going to be real with you. Doesn't matter what movie it is. They mass produce toys to the point where it could be Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader. It's going to go back.
The reason really old school toys were worth so much is because they made such a limited amount.
Right.
So that if you really did have that whatever Batman thing that they only made, 15,000 of, and right now there's only 1,000 left of them. Well, now it's worth $1 bazillion.
Exactly.
So that's not the same thing.
Phantom Menace was just a merchandising blitz.
Yeah.
That of course some things are going to sell. And
I mean, I didn't find Jar Jar funny, and I will admit there were certain things even back then when I wasn't as quote unquote woke, where I was just like, what are we doing with this accent here?
Yeah, there's a couple. Look,
same with the Federation guys.
Yeah, with the Neimoidians, Gunray.
Yeah,
George just had like the worst. Like,
and let me be clear, I don't believe George is racist.
I truly don't either.
I just think
but did you see
not thoughtful?
Yeah, did you see his response? It was totally. It was whoever.
I feel like he looked sad.
Well, it was the whoever smelt it dealt it defense of, well, you must be racist if that's where your mind went. Literally, that's what he's. And you're just like, okay. Like, I get it. He actually did, a lot of times people call out Watto as like a Jewish stereotype. He claims, and I don't doubt it, that it was actually based on a character from an Alec Guinness movie that had a similar accent. You could believe it or not, it doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah.
I understand the sensitivity and I totally like appreciate it. At the same time, in 1999, I am 12 years old.
You're thinking about
never
that.
Registered in my head.
Absolutely not.
Once.
I was 21 or 22, 1999, 23. I was 23. So like I was married first off. But I did see that movie with my best friend too. So there's like all these things where like I had a great time going and seeing this movie partly because of the spectacle and a few of my loves. First off, after watching A Rumble in the Bronx, there was no movie where there was cool martial arts movie fighting where I wasn't going to be at that movie.
Right.
Like, and this This is like the other thing is that he could finally make action that Jedis would actually do.
Right. Yeah, I think one of the cool things, a lightsaber battle or really any action, and this is just kind of going back to like basic screenwriting, like an action shouldn't just be an action scene because you need an action scene. The action should show you something about that character.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that, especially like one of the most impressive just feats of like sword play is once Qui-Gon has gone down for the count and Obi-Wan, still a young apprentice, not a young apprentice, he's been an apprentice for a while, but he's still learning.
Yeah.
And he kind of can't 100% control his rage. And he kind of momentarily taps into something a little darker.
Yep.
And it's the coolest lightsaber fight ever, and there's not a ton of flips, it's just pure aggression. And we see Obi-Wan like the whole time that he has this complicated relationship with Qui-Gon. He definitely loves Qui-Gon, but he also is just like, why can't you just be this? And Qui-Gon's like, because you don't understand yet. And to see this master go, and Obi-Wan just loses it, and then he ends up losing his footing because he's full of aggression, and he kind of has to use his head and literally use the Force to get him out of it again.
Yes.
Not only is that just a great fight sequence, but again, it tells you something about Obi-Wan that we didn't get to see before.
Well, even when I was watching the beginning earlier today, I was realizing that the other thing that they're doing is they're setting up how good Darth Maul is by showing you how good the Jedi are. Right at the beginning, going through those droidicas and all the other droids and stuff like that, and doing it so easily that it's ridiculous, is setting up how good Darth Maul is going to be once he goes up against them.
Right. And I think that's what you bring up a really good point, and you said it before too, with like we hadn't really seen Jedi at all.
Yeah.
We'd seen one who was two that were about to die from old age, and one that didn't actually become one officially until the last 2 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
So here's the age of the Jedi. And I think what people don't give Phantom Menace credit for, and I get it, because a lot of times it's like you have to take a movie as it is, but it literally is episode 1 of now 9. But at the time, 1 of 6. And I think there's a lot of seeds in this movie that maybe don't feel in place when you're watching it. But when you think of the larger thing, like let's go back to Jar Jar for a second. Like you're kind of like rolling your eyes at Jar Jar and you're like, this guy's a doof. I get it. You're beating it into my head.
Yeah.
And that plays a big part into what happens next, because when he becomes a senator and he has to basically fill in for Padme, he knows he's a doof. He knows that everyone thinks he's a doof. He's a screw up his entire life. What's the one thing I can do to help and not look stupid? Oh, everyone wants me to give the Chancellor powers. It's because of how he's perceived from this film that ultimately dictates
everything he does.
Right. Yeah. What happens to the entire galaxy. And there's that beautiful, it's one of the interludes in one of the Star Wars Aftermath novels where Jar Jar is the most hated person in the galaxy because they know what he's done. And all he can do now is be a street clown performer. Because
I haven't read that.
Dude, it's heartbreaking. It is the most poetically heartbreaking piece of Star Wars I've ever, movies, TV shows,
Now I want to
novels.
read that for sure.
It's just a couple pages, and only kids think he's funny. It's basically a meta commentary on Jar Jar as a character.
Yeah.
Only kids think he's funny, dressed up as a clown in the streets of Naboo because everyone hates him because they know that all of this was his fault.
And he has to be dressed up as a clown so nobody knows it's him.
Yep. It's heartbreaking.
Brutal.
But I think that, like I said, like it plants those seeds, especially too, like I just did an episode of Force Center podcast where we talk about changes we would like, more special edition changes we'd make to the trilogy. And I said, I would love if they added Qui-Gon to the end of Return of the Jedi with all the Force ghosts. Ooh. Because I believe that Qui-Gon is one of the most central characters in all of Star Wars, period.
He is awesome.
It's not just that he's awesome. I think Qui-Gon tells you the answer to what the question of 9 movies is, which is, what is balance of the Force. And I think Qui-Gon is by the time we get to Revenge of the Sith, we realize, man, the Jedi aren't that great. They were so narrow-minded.
Yep.
And Luke even says it in The Last Jedi.
Everybody hates it, but I love that scene.
I love that scene too, because he's like, do you think that the Force just goes away if there's no Jedi or Sith? Do you think that, that's vanity to think that they own their side of the Force? And Qui-Gon in this movie shows true balance, because he knows that he needs to tap into the light side and be a Jedi, but he also is not so rigid that he can't let the living Force flow and follow it to get to Anakin. And in my headcanon, I have nothing to support this.
Yes.
But in my headcanon, I truly believe that after he is stabbed and he's laying on the floor, he's not dead yet. I think that the Force shows him exactly what's going to happen. And when he tells Obi-Wan, you must train the boy, he knows what's going to happen, and he must become Darth Vader, because he knows that someday Luke is going to have to do it.
That's deep. I like that.
I love it. And I think it makes sense with Qui-Gon's character, because
amazing.
He is exactly what the Jedi should have been, which is keepers of the Force as a living thing, instead of and
focused on the now.
And it's such
Yoda says I should be mindful of the future.
Right,
mindful,
exactly.
but not without getting in the way of what you're doing currently.
And I think that's another one of the themes of this movie that people overlook is obviously there's some stuff on the nose about religion and versions of the Force, but I also think that it's about, and even the whole prequels is about taking this concept of love, morality, doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And putting kind of these rules around them, and putting these things around them that become bureaucratic and dogmatic, ways of the Jedi, ways of the Sith. If you don't do this one piece of red tape thing here, you are not following this. And that's kind of I feel like it's George's commentary on religion. All these man-made rules,
dogmatic thing make you maniacs.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
that does make a lot of sense. If you think about the worst of any religious group are the fanatics. Mm-hmm. A regular old Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, whatever, they don't go to church every day or every week, or even they go for holidays and every once in a while when they're in mood. But most of the time they're just out living their life, having a belief that's there.
Yeah.
But doesn't make them do a bunch of shit.
And it's funny too, because it's all of their beliefs, look, I don't want to turn this discussion into something it's not, but I kind of feel like at the end of the day, a lot of those beliefs have central morality weaved in them.
Absolutely.
Here and there.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like that's a commentary on the Force, which is the Force isn't just the light side. That's what always kind of bothered me about, bringing balance to the Force was it's not destroying the Sith, because that's not balance. And nope. I kind of feel like that's actually, love or hate the sequel trilogy, I kind of feel like that's where we're going with Rise of Skywalker.
I hope it is. I hope it's going to be some kind of gray Jedi type of thing.
Well, I think
it's the thing that makes the most sense, right?
I think they kind of hinted at it with Return of the Jedi, there cannot be life without death. There cannot be light without dark.
Yep.
And it's finding the balance within that, which is balance to the Force. And I hope that's what it is. But I do think that if that's where they go, which, by the way, I have no idea when you're listening to this. Rise of Skywalker has not come out. It's a few months away from this recording. But I do hope that's where they're going. And I think you can, if that's the case, if you go all the way back to Phantom Menace, you will see that's why I said Qui-Gon has the answer already. He is the answer. And that's why he's the one that figures out how to become one with the Force and be able to keep your essence in it.
Yeah. And I would also like to talk about how the fact is this movie is not about Anakin.
No, this movie is definitely about the Phantom Menace.
Yeah. And what's going to happen. And you'd think, it's making Darth Vader and all that stuff. And there was a hint at it with that poster and,
Great poster, by the way.
Fantastic. But at the same time, I think it helps that it wasn't about Anakin. He's just involved.
Yeah, I think what people... another criticism that's leveled at this, and I totally understand this, and I have no, this is totally valid criticism. A lot of people say, this movie can't pick a lane. If it's a kid's movie, why are you bogging it down with politics and trade routes and blockades? I'm I get it. I hear you. I hear you 100%.
Yeah.
But I think what's necessary. Look, I was 11 years old. I didn't know what a trade taxation blockade was, but that's why George is not great with dialogue, but he was on the nose enough to get the point across that like, hey, something is going down here that's not right. And we politically cannot agree on how to solve it. Whether you understand the technical or the specifics, it doesn't matter. And the reason why I feel like that is so pivotal to this movie and why it's so interesting looking at the politics of the galaxy going forward is because we have to know how it worked before we can understand how Palpatine is going to manipulate it.
And get power. Like, the key thing for Palpatine is he literally becomes the Senate. Right. He gets them to give him the power. So, like, if you don't have politics in these movies, you can't tell the story.
And what I think is so great about Sheev Palpatine in this movie is that, and this is what I got chills thinking about this. Like, this is how great of a villain and how great of a character Palpatine is. He doesn't go in to the Senate. He doesn't go into this whole situation and is like, I'm going to start breaking it. He's smart enough to know, oh, this is already broken.
I just have to find the cracks.
Exactly.
And pop them open.
And get in. And that's what he does for the entire rest of the saga. He's not the one that is going in and causing the problems. He's the one that's smart enough to go where the problems are and use it to his advantage. And in this movie, he literally gets in Amidala's ear and says, like, watch, they're going to, because the Chancellor is homies with this guy, they're not going to do what you want to do because they're getting paid by him. And he's not wrong. He's not lying.
Yep.
He's completely
telling the truth.
He's telling the truth in the most manipulative way possible.
Amazing.
Because he knows the system is broken and he can use it to his advantage. That's scarier to me than like setting someone up and framing them. And that's the stuff that's like, well, if you cut that out of the movie, you've cut out the heart of what makes Palpatine such a great character.
Absolutely. And on top of that, this is one of the few times that I would say they did so great playing on the fact that you knew who Senator Palpatine was going to be. Because, like, I think it even added more, like, gravitas to him being a scary bad guy. Because, like, every little thing he said that was, like, manipulative and just kind of, like, seemed nice, you knew was a lie and stuff like that, just made each thing more creepy and more scary and more like, where is he going to go with all of this?
And I just love that whole scene where he's like, and now look, here comes the bureaucrats. They're going to get in his ear because, you know, like, ooh, you're right. But, I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing right now. Cool. And you're going to do this for the next couple movies until, like, checkmate.
Until you win.
Right.
And and Luke makes that great point. At the height of the Jedi's powers, they were taken down by 2 Sith that existed, basically.
And really one, because the second one was kept changing, interchangeable. Yeah. But that's, again, like, when I think about this movie and when I hear like the politics, I'm like, okay, but if you're a really big Star Wars fan and you really care about, like, you know, what the whole story is from start to finish, that is so unbelievably critical. It seems like it's not in the moment, but when you think about it on the level that we're talking about, when it shows like, this is his game plan. Keep your eye out. And it's
also what Sith do.
It is what Sith do.
They manipulate and they're sneaky, and then they get you when you don't expect it.
Right.
And they build power to a point where if they do it right, then they can't win. It's when they go crazy, they can't lose. So they strike when there's no one to defend. And
it's such beautiful foreshadowing for how he's going to seduce Anakin later on. He's going to seduce him by telling him truths.
Yep.
Truths that delivered with the right context. He's like, the Jedi want you to spy on me, don't they? Not a lie. Yep. He's like, the Jedi don't tell you about Sith legends, do they? Not a lie.
Yep.
So I think that's so great. Let's talk about one of the other things. I feel like it's easier to go through the criticisms that people have and kind of explain why.
I think I have a hot take on one of them possibly, but we'll see.
Next on my list is Midi-chlorians.
Oh, okay. I don't have a hot take on that one. I have a general. It's one of those things where, like, watching it today, again, I looked at it and I went, I know what they were doing there. They were trying to show you how powerful Anakin was.
Right.
And they wanted to do that in a way that was like a graph almost. Like, oh, Yoda doesn't even have...
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I know why. I think it was a bad idea.
Interesting. So here's my take, and I'd love to get your opinion on this. Especially, too, I really respect that you've read so much Star Wars lore that follow me, and I want to get your opinion on this. Here's my take on midi-chlorians. I actually feel like midi-chlorians are a great idea and close a potential logic gap in my head.
Okay, let's hear it.
The Force is everywhere. It surrounds, binds, penetrates.
Now I think I know where you're going with this, but go ahead.
So, if that's the case, let's take Han Solo. In Episode 4, he's like, the Force isn't a real thing. By the middle of Return of the Jedi, he's watching Luke levitate C-3PO 50 feet in the air.
Yeah.
So clearly he believes in the Force at that point. He says so much in Episode 7.
Yeah.
So if the Force is just something that you have to be cognizant of to tap into it, what is Han Solo doing, like, trying to still use, a blaster? Dude, if you believe in the Force, find a way to tap into it. It makes no sense why he wouldn't, which leads me to believe that there has to be people that are sensitive to the Force. And that's why I've kind of always said, like, people are like, it's like evolution versus creationism. And I've always said, well, why couldn't evolution be created by a higher power? Why do they have to be mutually exclusive? Why can't midi-chlorians exist as something that...
In the current iteration of creationism, not so much.
Sure.
But in a smart version of creationism, you can make an argument for that. Like, God created the first bang.
Exactly.
Boom, fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
and then let it go where it went.
Right. I'm saying, like, I feel with midi-chlorians, I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, the Force is there for everybody, especially in some of the new novels.
Yeah.
You'll see that I'm talking specifically about Black Spire.
Oh, I haven't read that one. I haven't read most of the new ones.
Yeah, it's a Star Wars Galaxy's Edge tie-in, but it's about a rebel spy who goes, and she meets some people who collect Force relics. Okay. And they believe, like, hey, just because you can't levitate things and use the Force does not mean that the Force is not moving you in, like, fate in certain directions. So that's why I'm saying, like, I don't feel
that's
that
interesting, because then you start arguing about, is free will real when you make the Force moving you type of thing,
which I kind of believe not.
Interesting.
In a sense, I feel like the Force is kind of like this. It's like a stand-in for God. And I kind of feel like God is everywhere. And some people, if you choose to tap into it, you can, a lot of people praying or whatever. Yeah. I think that...
I grew up in a religion that believes that. So.
Sure. But I believe that specifically with midi-chlorians, it's like the Force is all around you. But in order to manipulate the Force, there is something inside some people that is able to communicate with it. And it's not with everybody. That doesn't mean that there's no existence of Force for some people. It just means they aren't able to manipulate it. And that's why I feel like that explains to me why some people are Jedi and some people aren't.
Yeah, or some people are Force sensitive but aren't quite Jedis.
Exactly, because their midi-chlorian count is lower.
Lower. Yeah. I mean, I could see your argument there, but it's almost like the difference between being a wizard, like in some, fantasy books. Like, some people just have the gift of being able to be a wizard. There isn't a real explanation for why that is the case.
Sure.
Some people have it, some people don't, and some people can just do rituals, and the rituals will work if you have the right kind of thing and the right kind of words and stuff like that. But if you want to do this specific thing, you got to have a gift to do it, basically.
Okay.
And maybe there's different levels of those gifts. And in this case, I know George has argued that Luke is the best Jedi there's ever been. That is he's asserted that Luke is the best. Better than Anakin, better than everybody. And so, in theory, probably has a higher midi-chlorian count. Now we're saying that Luke, who was just born of, Jesus, in theory,
right,
and Padme has more midichlorians and more power than the guy who was born without a dad.
I mean, to be fair,
I had I had a problem with that one too, by the way.
To be fair, you're making a ton of assumptions.
Yeah.
I mean, but so am I.
Yeah.
I guess that's the point. I guess for me too, it's like, well, yeah, they definitely left the virgins of the Force as like I know that there was some canon or lore about it, and then once they reset the canon, like that doesn't really count anymore. Like, did Plagueis and Palpatine kind of manifest him?
There's a. What book is that? I know. I think I read something that had that.
It might be the
Darth Plagueis book.
Yeah.
Where that was a possibility. They kind of hinted that was what they were trying to do.
Which, sure, it's not something that I was like, I need an answer for this right now. I kind of accepted it as like, like you don't ask why. Mr. Anderson is Neo, why he's the one. You don't ask why he is. You just accept that for whatever reason there's one, and that's the
guy. Yeah.
And that's kind of what I always thought about Anakin.
Yeah.
It was like this was gonna happen, and it just happened.
And it had to happen the way it had to happen.
But the midi-chlorians, it's one of those things where it's like, look, I get it. Even if my theory is like eye roll, whatever, it's like it's not that big of a deal to me,
I mean, I get that. It for me, it took a little bit of mystery away from the Force, which is kind of one of my favorite things about the Force, is that it's like pretty much a mysterious thing.
I guess for me, I feel the opposite, and like I feel like the Force it grounded the Force in a way that you couldn't use it as a Deus Ex Machina.
Interesting, because I know Ed hates the midichlorians.
Yes, he does.
And the way you're describing it is a thing that Ed would normally like.
Right. It's like,
so that's interesting, because like I understand why people would like that, because it does ground it. You're right. It creates an explanation. Okay, well, that's why Jedis exist,
right,
or Sith exist, or the different versions. I guess at this point, what was Kylo Ren part of? The Knights of Ren.
Like he's the one that like is like Jedi Sith. I'm over it. I'm my own thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Which makes me again hope that we get to a point where
there's some gray.
Right.
Maybe even they join up.
Some true balance.
Yeah.
So the midi-chlorians thing, it is what it is. So let's get to kind of another thing. It's like I can't argue with this one.
Okay.
When you give a child actor terrible dialogue,
yes,
there's only so much that Jake Lloyd could do, and to put the burden on him, I feel like is almost 100% unfair.
I feel sorry for Jake Lloyd. People like hate that guy, and
he
was
also not nice now.
8 years old. Yeah, I see.
But again, it's like cause and effect. He's not nice now because we were not nice then.
Yes, he had to like come up with some people who get made fun of a bunch when they're kids. They come up with a way to handle it, and then maybe they do it with a sense of humor. That would be Ron Swallow. Some people, get madder and madder and then become an asshole, and it sounds like that was Jake Lloyd, which is too bad. But I don't blame him for that. And actually, this is my hot take.
Right.
I think he did a pretty good job.
You
know why? I thought he was an 8-year-old.
Yeah, exactly.
And he was acting like any 8-year-old would probably act if they were really good at some stuff.
People roll their eyes and they're like, ugh. I'm like, okay.
And they blow you up.
Right.
Boom. And I'm like, that's every
8-year-old.
8-year-old. I used to babysit 8-year-olds. And I'm telling you, that is how every 8-year-old speaks.
It's like, do you think that Jake was like, hey, we got the line, but do you think I could just improv? Yippee! I'm feeling it. It's like, no, that's what they told him to say. Like, this is pod racing. It was not something that he like improv'd after they did 10 takes.
This is pod racing.
Yeah,
but by the way, love the pod racing scene.
Pod racing's great. Yeah. I don't understand.
I played pod racing.
Oh, dude.
The game. It was fucking great.
The one on...
Sorry about the cussing there.
It's okay. I will make a note.
But that's how awesome it was. I had to cuss.
That was the one for N64, right?
Yeah.
That's still, to this day, the fastest racing game I have ever played.
It's an amazing game. I'm not good at most video games, but I'm really good at racing video games. And so it was one of the few times that I could play a game and just like actually beat people in it.
Right.
So it was amazing.
And
it was couch co-op.
Yeah, I remember that.
I miss the couch co-op stuff.
What one of the R.I.P. in 64, man.
That was also GoldenEye, right?
Yes.
I sucked at GoldenEye, but
many a fight started.
still loved it.
But I think you're right. I do love, again, like going back to something you said way earlier, the spectacle. It was just incredible.
It looked amazing.
And more than just looked amazing, I will never for the rest of my life forget the sound of Sebulba's pod racer. Like the sound design alone.
It was like, oh, so good.
I love that whole sequence. I don't really care that it stops the movie dead in its tracks. It's like when people are like, oh, the pacing of Phantom Menace. I'm like, now hold on, I'm not saying you're wrong, but hold on just a minute. Tell me again, the first half hour of Return of the Jedi, what does that have to do with the rest of the plot? Nothing. Almost every first 20 minutes of
getting them back together.
And then they split apart again.
Yeah.
Almost every first 20 minutes of every original trilogy Star Wars movie ends up being nothing that has anything to do. Like, you could just start Empire Strikes Back with, like, Luke sleeping, and he wakes up, and there's Obi-Wan's like, go to Dagobah, and then he has to do the AT-AT. It's like, why did Luke have to go get hit in a cave? It never comes back again.
Yeah.
So it's like, to put that blame squarely on Phantom Menace of, like, oh, the movie pacing, it's like, I hate to break it to you, but Star Wars has always been a little funky doodle when it comes to
By the way, that's how almost all books are.
Yeah.
The first like chapter to 2 chapters of a good fantasy book or a good urban fantasy or sci-fi book is usually something that doesn't have to do with the plot. It's character building,
right,
and world building.
But that's what you go to a Star Wars movie for. It's like you said, and that's where I agree with George, where he's like, where's the technical breakthrough? It's like, I hadn't seen anything like a pod race, like a sci-fi kind of amazing Mad Max, race before, and really not since.
And the battle at the end, the space battle at the end is pretty friggin' good too.
So that's the one thing where I'm like, it's not bad. It definitely, like, when you...
I know it was really silly where he's like, oh, I'll try this trick.
Yeah, so
I get how people didn't like that.
Here's the one thing that just, like, it's so strange about it is the movie stops and takes the time, I don't know, 20 minutes earlier to literally have Anakin be like, oh, that's how you fly. There's the pitch. There's the roll. Like, literally telling this guy, like, oh, I understand how an aircraft works.
Yep.
And I could probably do this if I flew it. So when you finally get the payoff 20 minutes later, it's very strange to me that they went with the choice of, like, let's do a bunch of stuff by accident. It's like, but you just explained that you understand the physics of how an airplane works.
Yeah. I think that somebody probably told George, this is just my guess.
Sure.
Somebody probably told George, like, hey, we can't have a kid kill a bunch of men, just murder people in a plane on purpose. You know what I mean? Like, we can't have him, like, blasting things out of the sky, which is good that, they use robots for a lot of it.
Right.
But then there was also...
There's Neimoidians on
it. So, like, he blows up that ship, but we can't have him purposely kill a bunch of... We can't have a 9-year-old kill a bunch of people. It might have even been a producer who was like, let's not. That's the only guess I have on it. And then they were like, well, how do we get around that? Because obviously, we probably shouldn't have a mass murdering 9-year-old. So,
I hear you. That's actually probably a really good theory. I honestly would be fine if he was so kick-ass pilot and then he accidentally crashes in there, and then the rest of it plays out exactly like that.
Yeah.
So the blowing up the ship is an accident, but, like, literally, like, flying around killing drones, like, it would have been cool if he was great at it. It's like, whoa, this kid knows how to do this better than us? That's insane.
That would be huge for that.
Yeah.
That would be a huge thing, actually. And it would have been cool, too.
Yeah, I don't know why they went with the choice of, oops, here's a new trick. But again, like... let's try spinning. That's a cool trick. Jake Lloyd didn't write that line, guys.
No.
That's a dumb line that, any, like, Meryl Streep would have a hard time delivering that line.
Yeah, nobody would do that well. A lot of people give shit to Hayden Christensen for the same thing, and I know we're not talking about that, but I never blamed Hayden Christensen. I blamed George Lucas on his terrible dialogue writing.
Yeah, it's tough, and
He's great at story. He should not write dialogue. He should have someone else write the dialogue, and he writes the story.
And he will be probably the first to tell you that. Like,
Yeah.
he's well aware. But there are performances in this movie that actually transcend the words on the page. And I think Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon and
Amazing.
Prunella August as Shmi.
Yeah.
I think Shmi is like such an underrated anchor of this movie. And this is where Jake Lloyd actually really shines, is that scene where he finally has to say goodbye to his mom. That feels very real. And it's good that it does, because that is the crux of everything that happens to Anakin for the rest of his life.
Yes, absolutely. She was amazing.
Even,
It's just like, I believe he was meant to help you.
Right. It's that reluctance. And I love that, like,
Yeah.
don't turn around, just because you're not going to be able to do it if you turn around.
Yeah.
Just go. Even Ray Park, who doesn't do the voice of Darth Maul, but he doesn't need to talk in this movie.
Nope. He
Does
just
not
needs to
need
be
to talk.
amazing.
Yeah.
And-
Every expression is like dead on.
Very scary too.
Yeah.
I mean, not Darth Vader level scary, but definitely like you don't want to mess with this guy scary. Like
But we take for granted now. But I remember when the teaser trailer for this came out, and I was like, wait a minute. There's a lightsaber that comes out both
sides?
ends.
Yes.
And there's like the representation of like the Western kind of myth or view of the devil. Literally. Like,
Yeah.
you look at an illustrated Bible and it's like, oh, there's God and Noah and Darth Maul. Like, it was terrifying in that trailer, I remember.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. And I mean, and when he does it in the fight, when he does it both blades at the fight, you're like, oh, how is this gonna
work?
Yeah, what's
Yeah.
gonna happen? And it was just like, and then they even cut it in half at one point, and then he used it as two blades instead. He just like, that guy was so, Ray Park just destroyed it. And I'd argue that Obi-Wan or Ewan McGregor just destroyed it as Obi-Wan. He was great.
He probably had the hardest task in this movie, because he is the only main character that we already know who he's going to be or
Yep.
what he is.
Yep.
And to not do an impression of Alec Guinness, but to have that in his mind, but still make it his own. And like I said, like, I feel like he's able to cut through a lot of the BS dialogue.
He was also the comedy.
A lot of times.
Yeah, like he was the guy who was like, well, the negotiations were
Or
short.
Yeah. And it's so funny too, because when you talk about like everyone knows the inflections of a lot of those lines, like, hello there, like,
Hello there.
and
Yeah.
that's what he brought. And that's why I'm so excited for his Disney Plus series
I'm
whenever that
so
comes.
pumped. Is it gonna be a series or a movie?
It's like an 8-part series.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's so great. And I think too, like, he took a character that was a really cool character in A New Hope, but like, look, no one's going to be like, that 70-year-old grandpa's my favorite when Han Solo's in the movie.
Yeah.
But I think he in this performance and the subsequent movies turned Obi-Wan into a character that became a lot of people's favorites.
Absolutely. I mean, we've done Obi-Wan on Nerd Goat, and it was turned into a great episode. And I will argue that it wouldn't have been as good an episode if it just been Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like, if you couldn't talk about the prequels and then the books that came up after that, and then on top of that, Clone Wars saga, or Clone Wars, the animated cartoon, then Obi-Wan wouldn't be as cool. So literally, the prequels created coolness for Obi-Wan that would not have existed.
I mean, the fact that, by the time we get to Obi-Wan in episode 4, we kind of get this feeling that he's kind of like, he was like the blue-collar, straight-laced Jedi worker. Just clock in, do what I'm told.
Yep.
What I love about episode 1 is that we get to see, and I said it already a little bit, like, this was still kind of a kid. He was still headstrong, as Qui-Gon says, but like the fact that you wouldn't look at Alec Guinness's Obi-Wan and think like, oh, that's a guy that was like, hey, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, whether you approve of it or not.
Yep.
And I think that's what's so great about this Obi-Wan, where you literally get to see this character from the beginning of the movie, like, Master, I'm kind of worried about something, I don't know what to do, to by the end, he is the Master and you believe it.
Yep.
He's the only one that killed a Sith Lord.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And a badass Sith Lord.
Him
And he kind of killed 2 if you almost killed too. If you want to really.
Yeah, I guess you're right, because he doesn't actually technically kill Darth Maul until much later in Star Wars Rebels. But,
Oh yeah.
but on screen.
Also, let's
in a
talk about.
movie.
I mean, if you want to talk about that, just it's
Sure.
going off of it.
No,
But that
please.
scene, when Obi-Wan beats Darth Maul, is so good because he's so much better now that it's not much of a challenge to him.
Yes, the one from Rebels. Yeah. And it's such it really also, like, again, I've said this a lot, but like I understand this movie has to stand on its own to be a good movie. I get it. I'm not going to argue with you on that. But there are so many cool things, like that episode of Rebels, like Master and Apprentice, which is a novel that takes place before Phantom Menace. There's so many cool things that, like, Phantom Menace is like aging really well. Maybe not as a film itself, but as a piece of this overall tapestry that is Star Wars.
I mean, literally, a lot of books, the Clone Wars cartoon, which I loved. That clone, I don't know if you remember this. They did an animated version of the Clone Wars,
right?
That was like a 6-part short series.
Yeah, like micro episodes.
Yeah, that was unbelievable.
Right.
It was incredible. There was it made I would say that it created people's love of Star Wars to get more creative, because they wanted to take Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, and turn it into something that made sense to them.
Right.
And I think Phantom Menace is still a pretty solid movie. Are there things I don't like? Absolutely, sure. Yes, Jar Jar bugs me a little bit. The Midi-chlorians tiny bit bugs me. The dialogue's choppy. I get it. There's things I don't like, but the fight scene at the end is so emotional. It's like, you wouldn't think that it would be emotional because it's like, seems like it's a political intrigue, but like it's not just it's like a big deal. Like, we're seeing Obi-Wan created. We're seeing Anakin created. Those are the steps all those steps had to happen for us to get the Darth Vader that we got, for us to get the Obi-Wan that we got. Like, a lot of things wouldn't exist without these prequels that now make me look back at it and enjoy it more. Because I had a minute when I hated it.
Sure, we all did.
Just like everybody else. But the more and more I think about it, the more I enjoy Phantom Menace. Still hate Attack of the Clones, like a lot, but Phantom Menace I really enjoy.
I have a complicated relationship with Attack of the Clones, but I feel like you and I are kind of on the same page. There, you know, with Anakin, there was a deleted scene, and it really bums me out that they cut it.
And which one?
In Phantom Menace.
Okay.
Where he gets into a fist fight with a young Greedo, and I don't like that it was Greedo, but I liked the idea that someone was kind of making fun of him and calling him a liar, essentially, that his pod was the fastest or something like that. And they get into a fist fight, and Qui-Gon pulls him away. And I wish they would have shown that, because
that adds something.
It adds, like, he wants to do the right thing so bad that he's willing to do a wrong thing because he has this justice complex, which ultimately will become his undoing.
Yeah.
It's on the original DVD. I don't think it's on the Blu-ray, but I wish
I've never seen it. I will go. I'm sure I can find it on YouTube.
Yeah, I'll play it for you after we're done here.
All right, cool.
It's worth watching. But also, too, can we talk about the marketing for a second for this movie? Because I remember, and I posted this a while back, to this day, probably my favorite marketing campaign. They did these TV commercials, and instead of just cutting down the trailer, they brought the actors back in and they read these poems. And these poems would go over footage. And I remember there was one, and it was Qui-Gon. He's like, it'll be a hard life full of, like, you know, pain and full of suffering and tough. But if you can, you're going to find out who you are. And it was like one destiny. And there was one for Darth Maul.
Wait, I think I remember this now.
And the Darth Maul was like, fear tracks the fearful. Fear is my ally. One fear. And it was, you know, they did this one whatever. And it was, I get chills thinking about how amazing those TV spots were.
Yeah. And I remember the reveal of the trailer with the double-edged thing, of course.
Yeah.
And then seeing the poster was just like,
yeah, for those of you who aren't, we've referenced it already in this episode, but if you're not familiar, the teaser poster for episode 1 was Anakin on Tatooine and he's kind of walking away from camera and his little hut is behind him, but his shadow that he's casting is full Darth Vader, which is the most striking piece of Star Wars art. It's so good. I think they used it for the whole Blu-ray Saga collection as the cover.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
It's so good.
I remember watching it and just going, oh, how does this little kid go evil?
Right.
How are we going to do this?
Right.
And creating mystery is the most important thing you can do when marketing a movie.
Definitely.
Like, the things that are best are when you go, oh, what's going to happen in this movie? And then you want to go because you want to know what's going to happen. And
I definitely think, we kind of have this skewed perspective where we have seen all the other episodes, so we know where everything's going. But a lot of people, I see this debate pop up every now and then, as if it's just like this thing that just keeps happening. But it's like, what episode order will you show your kids? And I know this is unconventional, shockingly. I'm going to start with episode 1 because I want them to see the whole story start to finish. And I think it's really cool. By the end of this movie, I think, especially if you're a kid, you're like, wait a second. Is that guy and the guy with the hood, are they the same guy? Because the camera and the language of film is telling me something's up. But again, it's like when we're adults, we're like, ugh, so on the nose. Obviously, we know it's Palpatine. It's like, it's not for you. Like, these are ultimately morality tales for 12-year-olds. And the first time you saw Star Wars was probably when you were 7 or 8 years old, too. So just like chillax, take the whole story as it is. Kids love pod racing. I love pod racing. And that's not to say, that's not a demeaning thing. Like, adults can't find something from it too. I actually,
the fight scenes are unbelievable. We've talked about it a couple times.
Yeah. I actually think that, like, I know this is not that episode we keep talking about, but I think Last Jedi is like a story for us adults that grew up with these morality tales of like, hey, by the way, your heroes failed. And that means like you can still do the right thing and you're going to fail sometimes, but it's how you move away or move on from failure.
Yep.
And I think like that's what's so cool about Star Wars and why I don't kind of want to cherry pick the ones I do and don't watch is because I feel like if you watch them start to finish, there are these emotional through lines throughout the whole thing. And I feel like people just regard episode 1 as like, oh, the stupid kiddie one. It's like, no, there's so much meat in this.
Yeah. Well, look, I know plenty of kids understand death, but people die in this thing. Like,
yeah.
So
were you shocked? Because I remember I was shocked because I was like, oh, when Jedis like die, they disappear. And then Qui-Gon, like, no, he just takes it.
Just died.
Yeah. I was like, whoa, we are in a whole new west.
Yeah, I remember being shocked. And I was, 22 or whatever I was at that point, and that was like still a shock. I was definitely like, whoa.
And I know that episodes 7, 8, and 9 weren't in the cards when he was making 1, 2, and 3. I know he was making 1 and 6, but how, like, that aside, how cool is it to end this movie with a funeral burning Qui-Gon and then end episode 6 with a funeral burning his chosen one or his protege Anakin?
Yeah.
Like,
I thought it was cool.
The poetry of all of it is just amazing.
And that's why I defend George Lucas in a lot of ways, because I think George Lucas gets those type of things right.
Right.
Like, he gets big picture ideas and story ideas fantastically. He's just not great at writing dialogue.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there were people who were like offered to write dialogue for him.
I actually think some people came in, but George, he's going to do what he wants to do. And again, like we said, I think some of them rose above it. I think Natalie Portman, we haven't talked about her.
Yes.
I think she, as the series progresses, tries to find ways every single time. And by Revenge of the Sith, she is saddled with the worst dialogue, not just in Star Wars, but like in movies.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
And the second one is pretty bad too.
Right.
But most of the bad dialogue goes to Anakin in the second one.
Right. And Natalie Portman, God bless her, she's doing a lot. I think she's not surprisingly much more comfortable as Padme in this movie than she is as the Queen. And I definitely, if you watch some of the early trailers and then you watch this movie, you realize like, oh, they went back and they like overdubbed all her Queen dialogue with a deeper register to kind of fool the audience, even though I'm pretty sure we all figured it out.
Yeah.
Even as like a 10-year-old, I was like, I get it.
Yeah.
It's the same person.
Still cool review.
Still a cool reveal. And also too, like,
I love the part where he's like, He's like, the queen trusts. She's like, the queen wouldn't approve. He's like, well, the queen's not here.
It's like, well, I don't approve.
Yeah, and we're like, oh, we know.
We get it. We get it, girl. Don't worry. We're with you. The other thing that we didn't touch on that I just want to really quickly say, one of my favorite set pieces in all of Star Wars, and I get it. It's like pretty digital, but whatever. Utagunga. Like,
which one is that?
The
underwater thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there's always a bigger fish, blah, 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 but God, that was beautiful.
I guess that's another thing too, and I'm acting like I don't like the sequel trilogy, which I actually love, Force Awakens and Last Jedi. But one thing that, like, I'll give it to you, it's like Jakku is Tatooine with a different name.
Yep.
There's a lot of these even like the trailer for Rise of Skywalker looks like, okay, if that's not Endor, it's at least another Force planet that we're going to.
Yeah.
By the time we got to Episode 1, though, like the idea of a whole different, like essentially another planet within the planet we're already on was super cool.
It was super cool. It was beautiful and added dynamicness. Is that a word? I don't know. It added something
dynamicity
to the whole thing. It was just like, and it was unexpected.
Yes.
Like when that happened, I was like, oh, we're going underwater, huh? How's this going to turn out, you know?
I think that's why I forgive this movie, because I say there's a difference between plot and story. And I feel like this movie has a lot of plot where it's like, and then, because we do that a lot in this movie.
Yeah.
We go to a lot of locations just because we can.
I mean, that's what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
George Lucas wanted to be like, look, I can make it look cool underwater. I want you guys to see how cool this is. This is what's in my brain.
I think what a lot of people like scares them and they don't realize, it's like, dude, if he made Star Wars A New Hope like in 1999, you probably would have gotten that instead of A New Hope.
Yeah.
That's what he wanted to do. If you're not like, that's more the George Lucas brand to me than any of the first 3 Star Wars movies.
Yeah, he basically had to do what he could do with Star Wars, and he just did the best he could with the technology he had and kept working on better technology.
And what I think Phantom Menace has that maybe Attack of the Clones and definitely Revenge of the Sith do not have is he hadn't gone full blown nothing is real yet.
Yes.
There's still a lot that feels like Amidala's ship, feels real. Tatooine, Mos Espa, they all feel very real. Yes, there's a lot of digital, but it doesn't feel like every single thing is digital like it's going to later on. Like there's still a sense of reality to a lot of it.
Yeah. And it was all, I mean, it's people got mad about like, well, if the fight scenes, if these guys could do all this stuff, how come they didn't do it? Well, we all know why they didn't do it, because the technology wasn't there.
Right.
They did a cool thing in Empire where he jumped up and was on the thing, and the little blippy thing to make it look like he jumped really fast, and, now he can do what the stuff that he would have liked them all to do.
But also, like I said, it's like, well, the one living Jedi is like 70 years old and can barely move. I hate nothing more right now than that video that's going around where someone re-edited Darth Vader versus Obi-Wan from A New Hope in the Death Star, and it looks like, the Raid. It just looks like 2 parkour guys going at it. I'm like, no, this is stupid and completely unbelievable. He's supposed to be beaten down. He even tells Luke, like, I'm getting too old for this. Why do you think I've been waiting so long to pluck you out of the desert? Like, it's to the point where I can't protect you anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I also agree. I mean, I kind of enjoyed that because I enjoy fight scenes. But I also 100% agree. And I think that fight scene takes away the most important thing in that fight scene is the gravitas of the fight scene. It's not them fighting that's cool there. It's why they're fighting.
Right, exactly.
In that situation, it's you're removing the most important thing, which is Ben is basically stalling so they can get away. He knows he's going to lose that fight already. The second the lightsaber that Darth Vader shows up, he's like, all right, I'm going to lose this fight, but I need to last long enough.
And compare and contrast that with the Obi-Wan and the fight in this movie, the aggressiveness, that's what I'm saying. Like, you get to see the character progression. So by the time we get to A New Hope, like, that sacrifice means even more, because you're like, man, the old Obi-Wan, he would have just gone for it, even, despite how old he was or whatever. But now he's like, this is a guy who doesn't need to use physical force anymore, which is cool. You need that the parameter, which is why you need episode 1. One last thing I want to talk about before we wrap out here. Episode 1 did something that I don't think any of the other 2 prequels were able to do, which was to, and this is hard to do, especially with Star Wars, which was to add a piece of music that has now become synonymous with Star Wars, with Duel of the Fates. Dun, 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 right. It's like whenever now you lightsaber fight with your friend with a toy lightsaber in the aisle of Target, that's the theme you hum. Yeah. And it's crazy because they had, Across the Stars was the love theme from Attack of the Clones. I don't think anyone could hum it.
No, I don't
they
even
had
know what it is.
Duel of the Heroes, or the Heroes Battle from Revenge of the Sith, which was nice in the movie, but I couldn't hum it for you now. No. I don't remember it. But Duel of the Fates has become so synonymous.
It's great
with like lightsaber battles, and it's just a cool piece of music.
Yeah, it fit the whole feeling of that scene. I can't even think of anything that fits a piece of cinema much better. I mean, I know there's some. You got your Superman, you got your couple Batman things, or whatever. But like it's in that realm,
right?
It's in a Superman Batman type of realm, which says something immediately.
Yeah, I just think it's so great that, and one of my favorite callbacks is Yoda versus Darth Sidious in Revenge of the Sith, and when you hear it flare up again, you're immediately like, yes, Duel of the Fates, it's all coming together. Yeah. And it's, again, like, that's another thing that, like, I feel like people just kind of don't give this movie credit for. I think, we've talked about, yes, there's, some bad dialogue, a lot of plot in this and this and this and this. There's some humor that doesn't work.
Yep.
But we've also realized, like, this sets the board in such a masterful way for the next 8 movies that are going to come after it.
Yep.
And I feel like...
And cartoons and books and a bunch of different things that wouldn't exist without this movie.
And it makes me so enraged when people are like, no, just start with like episode 3, or just start with even episode 2, when people are like, I was like, no, you need all the pieces. I know that there's things around it that maybe you don't like, but they all contribute to these emotional themes. Our friends at the Force Center podcast, they call it the emotional canon of these movies. And Phantom Menace has it in spades.
I agree.
And there you go. This was great. This went a little longer than we usually do, but I feel like I could talk for 4 more days about the Phantom Menace.
Seriously.
I love Star Wars. I think that's come across. I love that you love it as much as I do.
I do.
We don't agree on everything, but I love having these conversations.
We're supposed to. This is how we learn stuff. And you even almost moved my mind on the Midi-chlorians thing
just
little bit.
Pinch.
A tiny bit.
Pinch. And I'm not trying to win anyone over, but I do want to say, now we are at, like I said, this being 1 year of the show, I think conversations just like the one that you and I just had are the reason why I love doing this, because we are going to prove week after week after week that discourse is not dead. It's still out there. Any of you guys online, you have anything that you want to add to the conversation, at Billy A. Patterson, at Ron Swallow, at Nerd Goat Podcast. Let's get Ed and producer Bill in on it too. Ed will have some real hot
Ed has
takes.
a lot of hot takes on Phantom Menace.
Oh yeah.
If you want to get him riled up, mention Midi-chlorians.
We definitely had an episode a while back where he was adamant that Spider-Man could beat a Jedi.
I know. We were talking about that. He loves Spider-Man.
He does.
And I mean, like, the problem is that if you go off of some of the movies, you can make an argument for that. But if you go from the canon in books and comics, and then also the prequels, you're gonna have a hard time arguing that Spider-Man can beat a psychic magician warrior who has just as much danger-like presence as Spider-Man.
I definitely tried. If you guys want to hear Ed's just haranguing me about it, go back on this feed. It's titled, I think, like, Could Spider-Man Beat a Jedi? The whole conversation is there. It is a...
How many times did you have to bleed out the F word?
Oh, I think on that episode, I gave a disclaimer at the top because I was just like, I literally don't have the energy to try to go through and censor the things that come out of Ed Greer's mouth.
I'm going to miss some.
Thank you guys so much for listening. If you wouldn't mind, and just take just a second, go on iTunes, rate, review. I'm not asking for 5 stars. You leave what you feel is appropriate for you. I'm not asking you to write a dissertation. If it's just one sentence like, I like it, or I don't like it.
Hey, I'm asking for you to leave a 5-star review that also, maybe not a dissertation. Don't do that. But leave a 5-star review, you crazy people.
Watching you try to not swear
cuss,
right now
hilarious.
is
I was going to say, you crazy bastards. Does bastards count as
I
swearing?
feel like if Captain America says it, we can let it
cool.
go. Thank you guys so much for listening. I don't usually tease things because schedules change, especially with my guests, but I've locked these in pretty good, so I feel comfortable talking about what's coming up next. Next week, I'm looking forward to this one. We're talking 2005's Fantastic Four. Coming up later on, another Star Wars one, Solo, a Star Wars story. And
I almost did that one.
Yeah.
Because I like it.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that on my Nerd Go podcast.
Yeah.
And one that's I'm really looking forward to because I feel like no one's going to care but me, but we will make you care. D3, The Mighty Ducks with Hector Navarro is the best Mighty Ducks in the trilogy.
Interesting.
And we will,
I don't think I've seen it.
I'm hoping our audience has. Thank you so much for listening, and be on the lookout for Reboot It. The first one is in the can. We are coming out with 5 more for a total of 6, and if you guys like it, we'll keep making it. Thank you very much. I will see you guys next week.